Her words dripped with venom, yet they came wrapped in a sweet smile, disguised as compliments. Every joke was a stab right in front of everyone. I sat there, feeling all the eyes on me, waiting to see me break, waiting for me to fall apart. But I didn't give her that pleasure. While she laughed at my pain, something stronger grew inside me, the certainty that I would not leave that place defeated. My name is William Harris, and this is my story. Today you'll hear how a man who was turned into a spectacle found the exact moment to turn shame into justice. I share this because respect is not a gift, it's a boundary. And when family turns your kindness into their stage, justice will always find a microphone. Before we continue, I ask you to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, have you ever been invited somewhere only to be used as the cheap entertainment of someone determined to ridicule your dignity in front of everyone? But before I reveal exactly what I did and how the laughter died in an instant, I need to tell you who I was before that night and why she thought I was an easy target. Only then will her arrogance's downfall make sense. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in October, delivered by my son Michael himself. Dorothy was in the kitchen making her famous apple pie when he knocked on our door in Winnetka, that affluent suburb north of Chicago where we'd lived for 37 years. "Dad, Laura wants to invite you and Mom for dinner this Saturday," he said, though something in his tone felt rehearsed. "She's making that prime rib you mentioned liking, and she invited some friends over. She really wants to show off her cooking skills." Dorothy wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron, her eyes lighting up. After 45 years of marriage, I could read every expression on my wife's face. This one said hope. Hope that maybe. Finally, our daughter-in-law was extending an olive branch. "Oh, how wonderful!" Dorothy exclaimed. "It's been so long since we've had a proper family dinner together." Too long, I thought, but didn't say. 6 months, to be exact. 6 months since Laura had gradually, systematically begun creating distance between Michael and us. It started with cancelled Sunday dinners because they were too tired, then missing family gatherings because they had other commitments. Finally, limiting our access to our grandchildren, Emma and James, because we were overwhelming them with too much attention. I should have seen the signs earlier. At 69, I'd built Harris Construction from a single truck and a toolbox into one of Chicago's most respected commercial building companies. You don't succeed in construction for 4 decades without learning to read people, to spot the ones who smile while calculating how to tear down what you've built. But Laura had been clever. She never confronted us directly. Instead, she worked through Michael, planting seeds of doubt about our old-fashioned ways and intrusive tendencies. She convinced him that our Sunday family dinners were us trying to control their schedule. Our gifts to the grandchildren became spoiling them and undermining parental authority. Our advice, earned through decades of experience, became outdated thinking that doesn't apply to modern families. "Saturday at 7, Michael continued, still standing awkwardly in our doorway. "Dress nice. Laura's friends are, well, they're important to her social circle." That phrase stuck with me. Important to her social circle, not friends we'd love you to meet or people who've heard so much about you. Important to her social circle, as if we were props in some performance. Dorothy, ever the optimist, spent the next 4 days planning what to wear and shopping for the perfect wine to bring. She even went to Marshall Fields and bought a new dress, navy blue with pearl buttons, because she wanted to make a good impression on Laura's friends. I watched my wife's excitement and felt a familiar ache in my chest. Dorothy Harris was the finest woman I'd ever known. She'd stood by me through the lean years when I was building the business, working 60-hour weeks while raising Michael and keeping our home running smoothly. She'd been my partner in every sense of the word, and seeing her hope for acceptance from a woman who clearly didn't respect either of us made my jaw clench. Saturday evening arrived with an early October chill in the air. The leaves on our maple trees were just beginning to turn, painting our neighborhood in shades of gold and amber. Dorothy looked beautiful in her new dress, her silver hair styled perfectly, her face glowing with anticipation. "Do I look all right?" she asked, adjusting her pearl necklace for the third time. "You look like the day I married you," I told her, and meant it. Laura and Michael lived in a modern minimalist house in River North, all glass and steel angles that screamed expensive but felt cold. Their doorway was lit with designer sconces that cast harsh shadows, making everything look like a stage set. Laura answered the door wearing a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek chignon that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. She was undeniably beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that felt calculated, like everything else about her. "William! Dorothy!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying just a little too much enthusiasm. Come in, come in. Everyone's dying to meet you." Everyone. That should have been my second warning. The living room held 8 people I'd never seen before, all dressed like they'd stepped out of a luxury magazine. The men wore tailored suits that cost more than some cars. The women sparkled with jewelry that caught the light with every gesture. They held crystal glasses of what I recognized as expensive champagne, the kind that cost $300 a bottle. "Everyone, these are Michael's parents, William and Dorothy Harris," Laura announced, her voice carrying across the room like she was introducing performers at a theater. The conversations stopped. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward us with the kind of polite interest people reserve for interesting specimens. I felt Dorothy's hand tighten slightly on my arm. "William built a construction company," Laura continued, and I caught the subtle emphasis on the word built, as if it were somehow quaint or outdated. "He's been in business for, what is it, William, 40 years? 42, I corrected quietly. 42 years, isn't that something? Laura's laugh was light and musical, but there was something else underneath it, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A woman with silver hair and diamonds that probably cost more than my first house stepped forward. "How fascinating. What kind of construction?" "Commercial buildings mostly," I replied. "Office complexes, shopping centers, some municipal projects." "Oh, like strip malls and things like that?" the woman asked, her tone carrying just enough condescension to sting. "Among other things, yes." Laura's smile widened. "William's very hands-on. He still has his old work boots in the garage, don't you, William? Michael says you refuse to throw them away." The group chuckled politely. It wasn't overtly cruel, but there was something underneath the laughter that felt like teeth. Dinner was served in their dining room, where a table set for 10 gleamed under a crystal chandelier. Laura had positioned Dorothy and me at one end, slightly separated from the main conversation. It was subtle but effective. We were included but not central, present but not participating. The prime rib was excellent, I had to admit. Laura was a skilled cook, and she'd clearly spent considerable time and money on this meal. But as the evening progressed, I began to understand that the food wasn't the point. We weren't guests. We were entertainment. "Dorothy, you must tell us about raising children in the suburbs," one of the women said, her tone suggesting that suburban child-rearing was as exotic as lion taming. It must have been so wholesome. Dorothy, bless her heart, took the comment at face value and began sharing stories about Michael's childhood, her face lighting up as she described Little League games and school plays. But I watched the faces around the table and saw the subtle smirks, the exchanged glances that said these people found my wife's genuine warmth quaint and amusing. That's when Laura really began her performance. "Oh, William has the most interesting theories about modern technology," she said during a lull in conversation. "He still writes checks for everything, don't you, William? He doesn't trust online banking. Actually, I'd been using online banking for years, but I let it slide. And he has very strong opinions about how young people dress these days, Laura continued, her eyes sparkling with mischief. You should hear his commentary on skinny jeans. I'd never expressed an opinion about skinny jeans to Laura, but again, I stayed quiet. The best part, Laura said, leaning forward conspiratorially, is how he gives Michael business advice about things he's never experienced. Like, he'll try to tell Michael about social media marketing based on what he learned from Yellow Pages advertising in the 1980s. The table erupted in laughter, real laughter this time, not polite chuckles. And that's when I felt it, that moment when humiliation transforms into something harder and more dangerous. Dorothy's face had gone pale. She was beginning to understand what was happening, but she was too kind, too well-mannered to defend herself or me in front of strangers. But I was not. I set down my fork and looked directly at Laura, my voice calm and level. That's an interesting characterization of our conversations, Laura, though I think you might be confusing my suggestions about digital marketing integration with my questions about where exactly you earned your degree in business management. The table went quiet. Laura's smile faltered for just a moment. Because, I continued, still maintaining eye contact, Michael mentioned you have a business degree from Stanford, but I've been in business long enough to recognize when someone knows what they're talking about and when they're repeating things they've read in magazines. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Laura's face had gone very still, but her eyes burned with something that looked like panic mixed with rage. Dad, Michael said quietly, clearly uncomfortable. Oh, it's fine, Laura said, her voice bright and sharp as broken glass. William's generation just has different ways of expressing themselves. They're not used to women having opinions about business. And there it was, the trap she'd been building all evening, designed to make me look like either a fool or a sexist. Dinosaur, depending on how I responded. But Laura had made one crucial mistake in her little performance. She'd assumed that a 69-year-old man who still wore work boots was someone she could manipulate and humiliate without consequences. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. The drive home from Laura's dinner party was silent, except for the soft hum of our Mercedes and the occasional sigh from Dorothy. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel, but inside something was crystallizing. A cold, methodical anger that had nothing to do with wounded pride and everything to do with protective instinct. Dorothy stared out the passenger window at the Chicago skyline, her new dress wrinkled from sitting through 2 hours of calculated humiliation. When we pulled into our driveway, she finally spoke. William, what just happened back there? I turned off the engine and sat in the gathering darkness of our garage. What happened, sweetheart, is that our daughter-in-law showed us exactly who she is. But why? What did we ever do to her? That was the question I'd been asking myself for months. What had we done to earn Laura's contempt? The answer, I was beginning to realize, was nothing. And that was exactly the problem. Inside our house, Dorothy went upstairs to change, and I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon. Maker's Mark, the same bottle I'd been nursing for 6 months because good whiskey was meant to be savored, not drowned. I sat in my study, surrounded by 42 years of business achievements, framed contracts for major builds, photos of ribbon cuttings, awards from the Chicago Chamber of Commerce. But tonight, those accomplishments felt like evidence in a case I was only beginning to understand. I thought back to the first time Michael brought Laura home. It was 3 years ago, during a family barbecue in our backyard. She'd arrived wearing a white sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payment, carrying herself with the kind of confidence that comes from always being the most beautiful woman in the room. Dad, Mom, I want you to meet Laura Sinclair, Michael had said, his face glowing with the kind of happiness I hadn't seen since he was a boy opening Christmas presents. Laura had been charming that day. She'd complimented Dorothy's garden, asked thoughtful questions about my business, and showed genuine interest in our family stories. She'd even helped clear the table without being asked, insisting it was the least she could do after such a wonderful meal. "She's lovely," Dorothy had whispered to me while Laura was in the bathroom. "And she clearly adores Michael." I'd agreed, though something about Laura's perfection had felt a little too polished, like a performance that had been rehearsed. But Michael was 35 years old, successful in his own right as a financial advisor, and if he'd found someone who made him happy, who was I to question it? The courtship moved quickly. Within 6 months, Laura had moved into Michael's Lincoln Park condo. Within a year, they were engaged. The wedding was a lavish affair at the Palmer House, with 300 guests and a price tag that made my construction worker sensibilities wince. Though Michael assured me he could afford it, Laura had insisted on designing the guest list herself, claiming she had a better sense of social dynamics than Michael. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to who wasn't invited. Several of Michael's longtime friends found themselves excluded, as did Dorothy's sister Helen, who Laura claimed would clash with the aesthetic she was trying to achieve. But the real changes began after the honeymoon. The first sign was subtle. Michael started cancelling our monthly golf outings, claiming work was too busy. Then he stopped calling as frequently, and when he did, the conversations felt stilted, like he was reading from a script. Dorothy noticed it first. Mothers always do. "He seems distant," she'd mentioned one evening while we were watching the news. "Different somehow." "He's a married man now," I'd replied. "That changes things." But it was more than that. The son who used to call for advice about everything from investment strategies to car repairs suddenly seemed to view my opinions as outdated inconveniences. The man who used to bring his friends to our house for Dorothy's Sunday dinners began declining our invitations with increasingly elaborate excuses. Laura, meanwhile, became the perfect daughter-in-law on the surface. She remembered birthdays, sent thoughtful gifts, and always had a reasonable explanation for why they couldn't attend family gatherings. She was working on an important project. Michael was under pressure at work. They were trying to establish their own traditions as a couple. Each excuse was perfectly reasonable in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern that slowly but systematically separated Michael from his family. The grandchildren's arrival should have brought us closer together. Emma was born first, a beautiful baby, with Michael's dark hair and Laura's green eyes. James followed 18 months later, equally perfect. Dorothy and I were overjoyed, ready to spoil our grandchildren the way grandparents are supposed to. But Laura controlled access to the children with the precision of a Swiss watch. Visits were scheduled in advance and limited to specific durations. Spontaneous drop-ins were discouraged because they disrupted the children's routine. Gift-giving was monitored because too much generosity would spoil them and create unrealistic expectations. When Emma started calling Dorothy Grandma Dot instead of just Grandma, Laura explained that it was important for children to have formal relationships with extended family to avoid confusion about household authority. When James showed more interest in playing with the toy tools I'd bought him than the educational blocks Laura preferred, she gently suggested that perhaps we should consult with her about appropriate gifts to ensure they aligned with their parenting philosophy. Every boundary was presented as reasonable child-rearing practice. Every limitation was framed as what was best for the children, and every time we questioned these restrictions, we were painted as overbearing grandparents who didn't respect modern parenting methods. Michael, caught between his wife and his parents, chose the path of least resistance. He supported Laura's decisions even when they clearly pained him, and he began to echo her language about our intrusive tendencies and difficulty respecting boundaries. The final blow came 6 months ago, during what would turn out to be our last Sunday dinner together as a family. Dorothy had spent the entire day cooking Michael's favorite meal, pot roast with all the fixings, the same meal she'd made for his birthday every year since he was 5. Halfway through dinner, 5-year-old Emma had knocked over her juice cup, spilling grape juice across Laura's white blouse. It was clearly an accident, the kind of mishap that happens when small children and beverages occupy the same space. Dorothy immediately jumped up to help clean the mess, offering to wash the blouse and apologizing profusely. But Laura's reaction was swift and cutting. "This is exactly what I mean," Laura had said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Emma gets overexcited here because there are no consistent rules. At home, she knows juice stays on the table, but here, everything is chaos and indulgence." "Laura, she's 5 years old," Dorothy had said gently. "Accidents happen." "Accidents happen when children aren't taught proper behavior," Laura had replied, "and when grandparents undermine parental authority by letting them think rules don't apply." The rest of the dinner passed in uncomfortable silence. When they left that evening, Laura made a point of saying, "I think we need to take a break from these weekly dinners until Emma and James are old enough to handle the stimulation better." That was 6 months ago. 6 months of limited phone calls, cancelled plans, and the gradual realization that Laura had successfully engineered our exile from our son's life. Tonight's dinner party wasn't about reconciliation, it was about celebration, Laura's celebration of her complete victory over the 2 people who had raised the man she married. But as I sat in my study, sipping bourbon and thinking about the triumphant gleam in Laura's eyes as she'd humiliated us in front of her friends, I realized she'd made a crucial error in her campaign. She'd assumed that winning meant breaking us. She'd assumed that humiliation would lead to surrender. Laura Sinclair was about to learn that there's a significant difference between an old man and a defeated one, and William Harris was far from defeated. The next morning, Dorothy made breakfast. In silence, her movements around our kitchen slower than usual. She'd always been an early riser, greeting each day with coffee and quiet humming while she planned our schedule. But today she moved like someone carrying an invisible weight. "I keep thinking about last night," she said finally, setting my scrambled eggs in front of me. "Those people, the way they looked at us, like we were specimens in a zoo," I finished. Dorothy sat across from me with her own coffee, her hands wrapped around the mug for warmth, despite the October sun streaming through our kitchen windows. "William, what if we did something wrong? What if we really are too intrusive, too old-fashioned?" That question hit me harder than any of Laura's calculated insults. My wife of 45 years, the strongest woman I'd ever known, was questioning herself because a manipulative woman had convinced her that love and generosity were character flaws. "Dorothy Harris," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand, "in 45 years of marriage, you have never done anything but love our family with everything you have. Don't let that woman's poison make you doubt who you are." But I could see the damage was done. Laura's performance had achieved exactly what she'd intended, to make us question ourselves, to internalize shame for crimes we'd never committed. After breakfast, I drove to my office downtown. Even though I'd officially retired 2 years ago, I still maintained a small space in the Harris Construction Building for consulting work and to stay connected to the business I'd spent 4 decades building. The familiar smell of coffee and blueprint paper usually comforted me, but today it felt like a reminder of everything Laura considered outdated and irrelevant. My assistant, Maria Santos, had been with the company for 15 years. She took one look at my face and closed the door to my office. "Mr. Harris, you look like someone who didn't sleep well. Everything okay at home?" Maria was more than an employee. She was family. She'd helped coordinate countless company events, remembered every worker's birthday, and had an uncanny ability to read people's moods. If anyone would understand what I was dealing with, it would be her. "Maria, what do you know about background checks?" Her eyebrows rose slightly. "The kind we run on potential employees, or the kind that goes deeper?" "Deeper?" She studied my face for a moment. "Mr. Harris, is this about family?" I told her everything. The gradual isolation from Michael and the grandchildren, last night's humiliation, and the growing certainty that Laura Sinclair was not who she claimed to be. Maria listened without interruption, her expression growing more concerned with each detail. "You know what bothers me most about this?" Maria said when I finished. "Professional women don't usually tear down other women the way you describe Dorothy. Being treated, that kind of behavior comes from somewhere else, insecurity maybe, or something she's hiding." "That's what I'm thinking." Maria pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "My brother-in-law runs a private investigation firm. Very discreet, very thorough. They specialize in corporate investigations, but they also handle personal matters for executives who need to know who they're dealing with." Within an hour, I was sitting across from Roberto Martinez in his office on LaSalle Street. Roberto was a compact man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "Mr. Harris, before we discuss what you want to know, let me ask what you plan to do with whatever information I find." It was a fair question, and one I hadn't fully answered for myself. "I want to protect my family. My wife is questioning herself because of this woman's manipulation, and my son is being isolated from everyone who's ever loved him. I need to know if my instincts about Laura are correct." Roberto nodded. "Standard background investigation covers education, employment history, financial records, criminal background, and social media presence. More comprehensive investigations can include interviews with former associates, verification of claimed accomplishments, and analysis of behavioral patterns." "What level of investigation are you looking for?" "Comprehensive. This could take several weeks, and it's not inexpensive." I thought about Dorothy's devastated expression at breakfast, about the way Michael had avoided eye contact during Laura's performance, about my grandchildren being used as weapons in a war they didn't understand. Money isn't the issue. Time might be. I have a feeling Laura's planning something, and I'd rather know what I'm dealing with before she makes her next move. Roberto opened a new file on his computer. "Tell me everything you know about Laura Sinclair, starting with when and where she met your son." The next 2 hours felt like a deposition. Roberto asked detailed questions about Laura's claimed background, her behavior patterns, her social connections, and her relationship dynamics with Michael. He took notes with the precision of someone building a legal case. "A few preliminary observations," Roberto said when we finished. "First, the social manipulation you describe, using public settings to humiliate people while maintaining plausible deniability, suggests someone with experience in psychological manipulation. Second, the systematic isolation of your son from his support network follows classic patterns of emotional abuse. Third, the fact that she's never introduced Michael to any family members or longtime friends raises questions about her background. How long before you know something? Initial findings within 48 hours. Comprehensive report within 2 weeks. I shook Roberto's hand and left his office feeling something I hadn't experienced since last night's dinner party. Hope. Not hope that I was wrong about Laura. I was increasingly certain my instincts were correct, but hope that the truth, whatever it was, would be enough to save my family. That evening, Michael called while Dorothy and I were watching the news. It was the first time he'd contacted us since the dinner party, and Dorothy's face lit up when she saw his name on the caller ID. "Hi, sweetheart," she answered, putting the phone on speaker. "How are you and the children?" We're fine, Mom. Listen, I'm calling because Laura wanted me to apologize for last night. She feels terrible about how things went. Dorothy and I exchanged glances. Laura felt terrible. She's concerned that her friends might have come across as a little pretentious, Michael continued, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone delivering a prepared message. You know how these social gatherings can get, everyone trying to impress everyone else. She hopes you didn't take anything personally. The apology was masterful in its manipulation. It acknowledged that something had gone wrong while placing the blame on her friends rather than Laura herself. It suggested that we might have misinterpreted innocent social dynamics, and it positioned Laura as the thoughtful daughter-in-law who cared enough to make amends. That's very thoughtful of her, Dorothy said, though I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. She'd like to make it up to you, maybe have lunch together this week, just the two of you. She wants to get to know you better without all the distractions. My blood went cold. Laura wanted to get Dorothy alone, away from my protection, where she could work her manipulation without witnesses. I'd love that, Dorothy said before I could intervene. Great. She'll call you tomorrow to set something up. And Dad, Laura specifically, wanted me to tell you that she respects your business experience and hopes you didn't think she was dismissing your opinions. She's actually interested in hearing more about your success with Harris Construction. After Michael hung up, Dorothy turned to me with relief written across her face. See, I told you she was just nervous around her friends. She wants to make things right. But I saw something else entirely. Laura's next move was already in motion, and my wife was walking straight into it. What do you think about Laura's next move? Have you ever dealt with someone who apologized just to get closer for the next attack? Let me know in the comments. Your experiences help me understand how universal these manipulative patterns really are. I had 48 hours before Roberto's initial findings came in. 48 hours to figure out how to protect Dorothy from whatever Laura was planning. And 48 hours to prepare for a war I was only beginning to understand, because one thing was becoming crystal clear. Laura Sinclair's campaign against our family was far from over. If anything, last night's public humiliation had just been the opening act. Tuesday morning brought the call Dorothy had been anticipating. Laura's voice came through our kitchen phone speaker with practiced warmth, like honey poured over broken glass. Dorothy! I hope I'm not calling too early. I'm such an early bird. Occupational. Hazard from my Stanford days when I had those 8 a.m. economics seminars. There it was again. The casual mention of Stanford dropped into conversation like a designer label meant to impress. I watched Dorothy's face light up at the friendly tone, and my chest tightened with protective instinct. Not at all, dear. I've been up since 6. William always says I'm like a rooster in a dress. Laura's laugh was perfectly calibrated, not too enthusiastic, not too polite. That's adorable. Listen, I was wondering if you'd like to have lunch today. There's this wonderful little cafe in Lincoln Park that I absolutely love. Very quiet, perfect for getting to know each other better. I'd love that, Dorothy said, and I could hear the genuine pleasure in her voice. My wife was a naturally trusting person who always looked for the best in people, even when they'd shown her the worst. Perfect. How about noon at Cafe Luna? It's right on Lincoln Avenue. You can't miss it. And Dorothy, I'm really looking forward to this. I feel like we got off on the wrong foot, and I'd love the chance to start over. After Dorothy hung up, she immediately started planning what to wear, humming softly as she moved around our bedroom. I watched her choose a light blue sweater and pearl earrings, the same outfit she'd worn to our first grandchild's christening. You're excited about this, I observed. Of course I am. She's Michael's wife, William. She's family, and she's making an effort to fix things between us. I wanted to warn her, wanted to share my growing suspicions about Laura's true nature. But I had. No proof yet, just instincts honed by decades of reading people and business negotiations. And Dorothy deserved the chance to form her own opinions, even if I feared what Laura might do with access to my wife's trusting nature. Just be careful, sweetheart. Sometimes people apologize because they want something, not because they're sorry. Dorothy paused in front of her vanity mirror, meeting my eyes in the reflection. William Harris, you've become awfully cynical in your old age. Not everyone has ulterior motives. But they do, I thought as I watched her apply lipstick, with the care of a woman, hoping to make a good impression. They absolutely do. At 11:30, Dorothy kissed me goodbye and drove off in her silver Buick, waving from the window like she was heading to lunch with an old friend, instead of walking into what I increasingly suspected was an ambush. I couldn't concentrate on anything after she left. I tried reading the Wall Street Journal, attempted to review some consulting contracts, even considered working in the garden. But every task felt hollow when I knew Dorothy was somewhere across the city, potentially being manipulated by a woman whose true agenda remained hidden. At 12:15, my phone rang. Roberto Martinez's name appeared on the caller ID, and I answered before the second ring. Mr. Harris, I have some preliminary findings that I think you'll want to hear. I'm listening. Laura Sinclair's educational background doesn't check out. Stanford University has no record of any Laura Sinclair graduating with a business degree in the time frame she claims. In fact, they have no record of her attending at all. The words hit me like a physical blow. Are you certain? Absolutely. I spoke directly with the registrar's office. They keep comprehensive records going back decades, and they were very thorough in their search. Furthermore, the specific professors she mentions in her social media posts, 2 of them never taught at Stanford, and the 3rd retired 5 years before she claims to have taken his classes. I sat down heavily in my desk chair, my mind racing through the implications. If Laura had lied about Stanford, what else had she fabricated? There's more, Roberto continued. Her employment history prior to meeting your son is extremely thin. She claims to have worked in marketing for several Chicago firms, but I can only verify one position, a 6-month stint as an administrative assistant at a small advertising agency that went out of business 3 years ago. What about her family? She's never introduced us to any relatives. That's the most interesting part. I found a birth certificate for Laura Sinclair, but she was born in Birmingham, Alabama, not Connecticut, as she claims. No record of any family in the Connecticut area where she says she grew up. No high school graduation records from the prep school she mentions. The picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing. Laura hadn't just exaggerated her background, she'd created an entirely fictional identity. Mr. Harris, there's something else. I'm still verifying this information, but I found records suggesting that Laura Sinclair might not even be her legal name. What do you mean? I think your daughter-in-law has been using multiple identities. The woman who married your son appears to have reinvented herself completely, and I'm beginning to suspect this isn't the first time she's done it. After Roberto hung up, I sat in my study, staring at the framed photo of Michael's wedding day. Laura looked radiant in her designer gown, her arm linked through Michael's as they posed for pictures outside the Palmer house. But now, knowing what, I knew her smile looked different, calculated rather than joyful, triumphant rather than happy. My son had married a stranger. Worse, he'd married someone who had deliberately deceived him about every aspect of her identity. And now that stranger had my wife alone in a restaurant, working whatever manipulation she'd planned next. At 1:30, I couldn't stand the waiting anymore. I drove to Lincoln Park, parking across the street from Cafe Luna with a clear view of the restaurant's front window. Through the glass, I could see Dorothy and Laura sitting at a corner table, deep in conversation. Dorothy was leaning forward, her expression animated and engaged. Laura sat with perfect posture, her hands gesturing gracefully as she spoke. To any casual observer, they looked like 2 women enjoying a pleasant lunch together. But I knew better. I knew that one of those women was a loving grandmother and devoted wife who had spent 45 years building a family based on honesty and trust. And the other was a liar whose very name might be fiction. At 2:15 they stood to leave. I watched Laura hug Dorothy warmly, then press something into her hand, a business card or piece of paper. They talked for another few minutes on the sidewalk, Laura's hand resting gently on Dorothy's arm in a gesture of apparent affection. When Dorothy finally walked to her car, she was smiling. Actually smiling, as if the lunch had exceeded all her expectations. She drove past my parked car without noticing me, her face glowing with what looked like genuine happiness. I followed her home at a distance, my mind churning with questions. What had Laura told her? What had been written on that piece of paper? And why did my wife look like someone who'd just made a new friend instead of someone who'd spent 2 hours with a practiced manipulator? Dorothy was in our kitchen making tea when I walked through the front door, trying to look like I'd been home all afternoon instead of conducting surveillance outside a Lincoln Park cafe. "How was lunch?" I asked as casually as possible. "Oh, William, it was wonderful. Laura is nothing like I thought. She's actually quite sweet once you get to know her. And she's been through so much. I had no idea." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, been through so much?" Dorothy poured hot water over her tea bag, her movements gentle and thoughtful. "Well, she told me about her childhood. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 16, and she had to put herself through college. That's why she's so driven about success. She learned early that she could only depend on herself." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly designed to generate sympathy, that I almost admired its craftsmanship. Laura had transformed her fictional Stanford degree into a tragic narrative of triumph over adversity, making Dorothy feel guilty for ever questioning her behavior. She also explained about Saturday night, Dorothy continued. "Those friends of hers are very competitive people, always trying to one-up each other. Laura said she got caught up in trying to impress them and ended up saying things she didn't mean. She feels terrible about it." Another masterful manipulation. Laura had reframed her calculated cruelty as social insecurity, making herself the victim of peer pressure rather than the architect of our humiliation. And William, she wants to include us more in their lives. She's planning a family barbecue next weekend. Just us, Michael, and the children. She wants to start over and build a real relationship with us. I stared at my wife's hopeful face and felt my heart break. Dorothy was too good, too trusting to recognize the sophisticated psychological warfare being waged against our family. Laura had spent 2 hours dismantling every defense Dorothy might have had, replacing suspicion with sympathy and wariness with hope. "That sounds nice," I managed to say. "Oh, and she gave me this." Dorothy pulled a business card from her purse and handed it to me. She said, "If you ever wanted to discuss investment strategies, her financial advisor is supposed to be one of the best in Chicago. Very exclusive clientele." I looked at the embossed card. Jonathan Pierce, Senior Investment Advisor, Millennium Wealth Management. The address was downtown, the paper expensive, the design sophisticated. But all I could think about was Roberto's voice on the phone. "I think your daughter-in-law has been using multiple identities." Laura wasn't just working to isolate Michael from his family anymore. She was positioning herself to gain access to our finances as well. The lunch with Dorothy hadn't been about reconciliation. It had been reconnaissance, and my trusting, generous wife had just handed her the keys to everything we'd built over 4 decades of marriage. I need to tell you, the calm I felt in that moment scared me more than anger would have, because I realized that Laura Sinclair, or whatever her real name was, had just made the biggest mistake of her carefully orchestrated campaign. She'd underestimated not just me, but the depth of my love for the woman she was trying to destroy. The war was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Thank you for staying with this story. I promise you, the best is yet to come. Laura thinks she's won this battle, but she has no idea what she's awakened in a man who's spent 40 years learning that the strongest structures are built to withstand any storm. That evening, I called Roberto Martinez from my home office while Dorothy watched her evening programs in the living room. Her contentment after lunch with Laura made my discoveries even more urgent. "Roberto, I need you to accelerate the investigation. Laura had lunch with my wife today, and I think she's moving faster than we anticipated." "What happened at the lunch?" I told him about Dorothy's transformation from wariness to sympathy, about the tragic backstory Laura had spun, and about the business card for the investment advisor. "Mr. Harris, that's classic confidence game methodology. Create a sympathetic narrative to lower defenses, then introduce financial opportunities." "Can you send me a photo of that business card?" I snapped a picture and texted it to him immediately. "Give me 1 hour," Roberto said. "I'll run Jonathan Pierce and Millennium Wealth Management through our databases." 53 minutes later, my phone rang. "Mr. Harris, we have a problem. Jonathan Pierce is real and Millennium Wealth Management is a legitimate firm. But here's what's interesting. They specialize in what's called legacy transition planning for wealthy seniors. Their client base is almost exclusively people over 65 with substantial assets." "Go on." "Pierce has been involved in several cases where elderly clients transferred significant assets before dying under suspicious circumstances. Nothing prosecutable, but enough red flags that he's being monitored by financial crimes investigators." My blood went cold. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying your daughter-in-law just connected your wife to a financial advisor who specializes in separating seniors from their money. And Mr. Harris, I found Laura Sinclair's real identity." I gripped the phone tighter. "Tell me." "Her legal name is Linda Sue Parker, born in Birmingham, Alabama, 32 years old. She has arrest records in 3 states under various aliases, always targeting wealthy men for romance scams and identity theft. She's suspected in at least 2 cases where elderly husbands died shortly after changing their wills, but nothing was ever proven." The room seemed to tilt around me. 2 cases. Dallas, Texas, 2019. She married a 73-year-old retired oil executive named Harold Davidson. 3 months later, he died of what appeared to be natural heart failure. But the timing was suspicious because he just updated his will, leaving everything to his beloved wife, Linda. Before his family could contest, she disappeared with approximately $4 million. And the second case? Miami, Florida, 2021. She became engaged to a wealthy real estate developer named Antonio Restrepo, age 69. He died in what looked like an accidental drowning at his beach house. Again, a recent will change left everything to her, and again, she vanished before anyone could ask questions. I felt like I was drowning myself. "Roberto, my son, does he know any of this?" Based on the pattern, probably not. These women are experts at compartmentalization. She's shown your son one identity while using others for her criminal activities. The question is, what's her endgame with your family? I thought about the $8 million trust fund I'd established for Michael and the grandchildren. I thought about the substantial assets Dorothy and I had accumulated over 4 decades of marriage. And I thought about Dorothy's glowing face. After lunch, full of trust for a woman who might be planning our deaths. "Roberto, I need everything you can find on Linda Sue Parker, and I need it by tomorrow morning. Every alias, every known associate, every crime she's suspected of committing. Already working on it. But Mr. Harris, if she's following her established pattern, time is critical. In both previous cases, the victims died within 6 months of her entering their lives. Your son married her 8 months ago. After hanging up, I sat in my office trying to process what I'd learned. My daughter-in-law was not just a liar or a gold digger. She was potentially a serial killer who had married my son as part of an elaborate plan to murder her way to millions of dollars. But how could I tell Michael that the woman he loved, The mother of his children was a predator who might be planning his death. How could I explain to Dorothy that the sweet, tragic woman she'd bonded with over lunch was someone who had possibly killed 2 men already? I needed proof. Undeniable evidence that would expose Linda Sue Parker before she could complete whatever plan she was executing. And I needed to protect my family without destroying it in the process. The next morning, Dorothy announced that she wanted to invite Laura for dinner on Friday night. "Just the 4 of us," she said, scrambling eggs with more enthusiasm than I'd seen in months. "I want to cook for her, that wonderful beef Wellington recipe I learned from Julia Child's cookbook. Laura mentioned she's never had a home-cooked version. Dorothy, don't you think we should take things slowly, get to know her better before... William Harris, that woman has been part of our family for 8 months, and this is the first real conversation I've had with her. She's making an effort, and I intend to meet her halfway." There was no arguing with Dorothy when she'd made up her mind about hospitality, but as I watched her plan the menu with maternal care, all I could think about was Roberto's words. In both previous cases, the victims died within 6 months of her entering their lives. At 10 a.m., Roberto called with his complete report. "Mr. Harris, Linda Sue Parker is more dangerous than we initially thought. I've identified at least 4 different identities she's used over the past decade, and there are 3 additional suspicious deaths connected to her beyond the 2 I mentioned yesterday. 3 more? An elderly businessman in Phoenix, a retired judge in New Orleans, and a wealthy widow in Charleston. All died of apparent natural causes within months of meeting Linda Sue Parker or one of her aliases. All had recently changed their wills or financial arrangements in her favor. 5 people, 5 wealthy individuals who had trusted a beautiful woman and paid for that trust with their lives. She's what law enforcement calls a black widow killer," Roberto continued. "But she's extraordinarily careful, uses different methods, different personas, and she never stays in one place long enough to establish a clear pattern. The only reason I could connect these cases is because she made one mistake." "What mistake?" "She used the same emergency contact. On hospital forms in Dallas and Miami, a phone number registered to a Linda Parker in Birmingham. It was disconnected years ago, but it established the connection between her various identities." "Roberto, what's her method? How does she kill without getting caught?" "Based on the autopsy reports I was able to access, she appears to use medications that mimic natural health conditions. Heart medications in elderly men to simulate cardiac events, blood thinners to cause internal bleeding that looks like stroke, insulin in diabetics to create fatal hypoglycemic episodes. She's medically sophisticated, enough to kill people using their own health conditions against them." The implications hit me like a sledgehammer. Laura had been asking questions about my health during recent family visits. She'd expressed concern about my blood pressure, suggested I should see a cardiologist for preventive care, even offered to help me organize my medications. "Mr. Harris, I need to ask, do you or your wife have any medical conditions that require regular medication?" "I take blood pressure medication and a daily aspirin regimen. Dorothy has some arthritis medication and takes calcium supplements." "Has Laura shown any interest in your medical routines? Asked about medications, offered to help with organization, suggested doctors or treatments?" My chest tightened as I remembered. 2 weeks ago, Laura had insisted that I should see a specialist about what she called my concerning fatigue levels. She'd even recommended a specific cardiologist, claiming he was the best in Chicago for men my age. She's been setting up the medical justification, I realized. If something happened to me, everyone would say it wasn't surprising given my age. And heart condition. Exactly. And Mr. Harris, there's something else. Jonathan Pierce, the investment advisor. His firm has been involved in rapid asset transfers for several elderly clients who died shortly afterward. I think Laura's plan involves more than just inheritance. She's planning to liquidate everything quickly after whatever she has planned happens. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. Linda Sue Parker wasn't just planning to kill me. She was planning to steal everything my family had built, leaving Dorothy destitute and Michael devastated by loss. But she'd made one crucial error in her calculations. She'd assumed that a 69-year-old construction worker would be as easy to manipulate and eliminate as her previous victims. Linda Sue Parker was about to learn that some old men don't go quietly into the night. Some of us build our lives on foundations strong enough to withstand any storm, including the one she was planning to unleash. And some of us have spent 40 years learning that the best defense is a devastating offense. If you haven't subscribed, yet this is the moment, because what happens next will show you exactly what a cornered man is capable of when everything he loves is threatened. Friday afternoon arrived with the crisp clarity that only October in Chicago can provide. Dorothy had been cooking since dawn, transforming our kitchen into a symphony of aromas, the beef Wellington browning to perfection, roasted vegetables gleaming with herbs, and her famous apple tart cooling on the counter. I watched my wife work, with the dedication of someone preparing a meal for royalty rather than a woman who was planning our deaths. The irony was almost unbearable. "William, could you set the dining room table with the good china?" Dorothy called from the kitchen. "I want everything to be perfect tonight. The good china, wedding gifts from 45 years ago that we only used for the most special occasions." I handled each plate with careful reverence, knowing this might be the last time Dorothy would use them for a family dinner if Laura's plan succeeded. But Linda Sue Parker had no idea that her intended victim had spent the past 3 days preparing a counterattack that would expose her for exactly what she was. The doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock. Through our front window, I could see Michael's BMW in the driveway, and my son emerged from the driver's side looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in months. Laura stepped out of the passenger side wearing a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying a bouquet of white roses and a bottle of wine that I recognized as expensive. Dorothy rushed to answer the door, smoothing her apron and checking her hair one final time. "Laura, Michael, come in, come in. Something smells absolutely wonderful in here." Laura stepped into our foyer with the grace of someone accustomed to making grand entrances. She handed Dorothy the roses with a warm smile that looked genuine, enough to fool anyone who didn't know what I knew about her. "Dorothy, these are for you, a small thank you for welcoming me into your beautiful home." Her voice carried just the right note of gratitude mixed with appreciation. "Oh, they're lovely. You didn't need to bring anything." "Nonsense. After that wonderful lunch we had, I've been looking forward to this all week." Michael hugged both Dorothy and me, and for a moment I saw my son as he used to be, happy, confident, unguarded. Laura's manipulation had been so gradual that he probably didn't even realize how much distance had grown between us over the past months. "Dad, thanks for having us over. Laura's been talking about Mum's cooking non-stop since Tuesday." "Well, let's not keep that beef Wellington waiting," Dorothy said, leading us toward the dining room. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Laura complimented every dish with exactly the right level of enthusiasm, appreciative without being excessive, knowledgeable without being pretentious. She asked Dorothy thoughtful questions about her cooking techniques and shared carefully edited stories about her own attempts at gourmet cooking. "I have to confess," Laura said, cutting into her beef Wellington with surgical precision, "I'm not much of a cook myself. I tend to rely on takeout more than I should. Michael keeps threatening to sign me up for cooking classes." Michael laughed. "She makes it sound worse than it is. Laura's actually quite good with simple things, but nothing like this." He gestured at his plate. "Mom, this is incredible as always." Dorothy beamed with pride. It's my pleasure, sweetheart. There's nothing I love more than cooking for family. Family. The word hung in the air with weight that none of them could feel except me. Because I knew that one person at this table wasn't family at all. She was a predator who had infiltrated our lives with surgical precision. Speaking of family, Laura said, her tone shifting slightly, I've been thinking about how we can all spend more time together, quality time, you know? Life is so precious, and we never know how much time we have with the people we love. There it was, the subtle introduction of mortality into casual conversation. Linda Sue Parker's specialty was making death seem like a natural topic of discussion, normalizing the concept before making it reality. That's very thoughtful of you, I said, watching her face carefully. Though at my age, I try not to think too much about time running out. Oh, but William, you're in excellent health for someone your age, though I do worry about the stress you must have dealt with running a construction company for all those years, all that physical labor, all those long hours. It must have taken a toll on your heart. Another chess move. She was building the narrative that would explain my eventual death, decades of stress finally catching up with an aging body. The doctor says my heart is strong as an ox, I replied. Good genes, I suppose. Still, prevention is so important. Have you been taking your medications regularly? I know men your age sometimes forget. Dorothy jumped in helpfully. Oh, Laura, you don't need to worry about that. William is very good about his pills. Takes them every morning with his coffee, regular as clockwork. I watched Laura's eyes brighten slightly at this information. She was cataloguing my routine, learning when and how I took medications that she might be able to tamper with. That's wonderful. Consistency is so important with heart medications. What are you taking, if you don't mind me asking? My grandfather had similar issues. The question was perfectly innocent on the surface, asked with just the right amount of personal interest. But I recognized it for what it was, reconnaissance for murder. Just the usual stuff. Blood pressure medication, a daily aspirin, nothing too exciting. Of course, and you take them at the same time every day. Without fail, Dorothy keeps them right by the coffee maker so I can't forget. Laura nodded approvingly, as if she was genuinely concerned about my health rather than planning to use that. Information to kill me. The woman was a masterpiece of deception, every word calculated, every expression designed to hide her true intentions. After dinner, we moved to the living room for coffee and Dorothy's apple tart. Laura positioned herself on the couch where she could see both the kitchen and the front hallway, her eyes constantly cataloguing details about our home's layout and routines. This is such a beautiful house, she said, accepting her coffee cup from Dorothy. You can feel the love and history in every room. How long have you lived here? 37 years, Dorothy replied proudly. William bought it right after Michael was born. We've watched the whole neighborhood grow up around us. It must be worth quite a lot now, with the way property values have increased in this area. Michael shifted uncomfortably. Laura, you don't ask people about their property values. Oh, I didn't mean anything inappropriate by it, Laura said quickly. I was just thinking how smart William was to invest in real estate when he did. Such foresight. But I caught the calculation in her eyes. She was assessing assets, estimating values, planning how to liquidate everything after we were gone. We've been blessed, I said simply. Hard work and good timing. And good planning, I'm sure. Do you have everything organized? Wills, trusts, that sort of thing? I only ask because after my parents died, it was such a nightmare dealing with their affairs. I'd hate for Michael to go through that kind of stress if something happened. There. It was the reason for tonight's dinner. Laura wasn't just planning our deaths. She was ensuring that the legal aftermath would be as smooth as possible for her benefit. Everything's in order, I assured her. Our attorney has handled all of that. That's such a relief. And Michael knows where all the important documents are kept? Of course he does. Dorothy said. "We've talked about all of that. No one likes to think about these things, but William's always been practical about planning ahead." Laura smiled warmly. "You're both so responsible. It's clear where Michael gets his good sense from." But behind that smile, I could see the gears turning. She was processing information, refining her plan, calculating timelines and logistics. As the evening wound down, Laura helped Dorothy clear the coffee cups, insisting it was the least she could do after such a wonderful meal. I watched her move through our kitchen with the observational skills of someone casing a location, rather than a daughter-in-law helping with dishes. When they were ready to leave, Laura hugged Dorothy warmly and thanked her profusely for the evening. "This was exactly what our family needed," she said, her voice full of apparent sincerity. "I hope we can do this more often." "Any time, dear. You're always welcome in our home." After they left, Dorothy began cleaning up with the satisfaction of someone who felt the evening had been a complete success. "I think that went wonderfully," she said, loading plates into the dishwasher. "Laura seems so much more relaxed here than she did at that dinner party. This is the real her, sweet, thoughtful, genuinely caring about family." I dried the wine glasses in silence, thinking about Roberto's words. She's extraordinarily careful, uses different methods, different personas, and she never stays in one place long enough to establish a clear pattern. Dorothy had just spent an evening bonding with one of Linda Sue Parker's personas, never suspecting that she was sharing recipes and family stories with a woman who was planning to kill us both. But Laura had made one critical error tonight. In her eagerness to gather information about our routines and assets, she'd revealed her timeline. The way she'd emphasized the fragility of life, the urgency of estate planning, the importance of spending time together while we could. All of it suggested that whatever she was planning would happen soon. Very soon. I finished drying the last glass and made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow morning, I would begin implementing a plan that would expose Linda Sue Parker for exactly what she was. Not to the police, who would need evidence I didn't have, but to the one person whose opinion mattered most. My son. Because Michael deserved to know the truth about the woman he'd married, even if that truth would shatter everything he believed about love, trust, and family. Linda Sue Parker thought she was closing in on her biggest score yet. What she didn't realize was that she'd just had dinner with a man who was about to turn her own weapons against her. Saturday morning, I made the most difficult phone call of my life. "Michael, it's Dad. I need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet me for coffee this morning? Just the two of us." There was a pause on the other end. In the background, I could hear Laura's voice asking who was calling, followed by the sound of Michael moving to another room. "Is everything okay? You sound serious." "Everything's fine. I just need to discuss some business matters with you privately. Father-son stuff. We agreed to meet at Murphy's Diner on Diversey, a place we'd been going since Michael was in high school. It was neutral territory, somewhere we could talk without interruption or observation. I arrived first and chose a corner booth with a clear view of the parking lot. When Michael walked in 20 minutes later, he looked puzzled but not alarmed. He slid into the seat across from me, his expression shifting to concern when he saw my face. "Dad, what's going on? You look like someone who didn't sleep last night." "Michael, what I'm about to tell you is going to be hard to hear, but I need you to listen with an open mind and remember that everything I'm saying comes from love." His body language shifted immediately, shoulders tensing, jaw tightening. "This is about Laura, isn't it? Son, Laura isn't who she says she is." For the next 30 minutes, I laid out everything Roberto had discovered. The false Stanford degree, the fabricated family history, the multiple identities, and most devastating of all, the pattern of wealthy men who had died shortly after becoming involved with Linda Sue Parker. Michael's face went through a spectrum of emotions, disbelief, anger, confusion, and finally something that looked like fear. "Dad, this is insane. You're talking about my wife, the mother of my children. You're describing some kind of serial killer from a movie." "I wish I were, son, but I have documentation." I pulled out the folder Roberto had prepared. Police reports, death certificates, newspaper articles about suspicious deaths, financial records showing rapid asset liquidation after each victim's demise. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Michael stared at the papers for a long time, his coffee growing cold as he read through report after report. When he finally looked up, his face had gone pale. "If this is true," he said quietly, "then my children, Dorothy, we're all in danger. That's why I needed to tell you." "Michael, I think she's planning something soon." The questions. She asked last night about my medications, my routines, the estate planning. She's gathering information for whatever she has planned. But why? Why would she target our family specifically? I pulled out another document, a financial statement, showing the total value of our family assets. Because we're worth nearly $12 million when you factor in the business, the properties, the trust fund I established for you and the children. To someone like Linda Sue Parker, we represent the biggest score of her career. Michael buried his face in his hands. "God, Dad, I married her. I brought her into our family. I put Emma and James in danger. You fell in love with someone who was expert at deception. That's not your fault. What do we do? How do we protect everyone without destroying the children's lives?" It was the question I'd been wrestling with all night. How do you expose a murderer without traumatizing two innocent children? How do you save a family that's already been shattered by betrayal? "We need to be smarter than she is," I said. "We need to make her reveal herself in a way that protects everyone we love." Over the next hour, we developed a plan that would give Laura exactly what she thought she wanted, while secretly documenting her true intentions. It was risky, requiring Michael to continue living with a woman he now knew might be planning his death. But it was the only way to gather the evidence needed to put her away forever. When we parted ways in the parking lot, Michael looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 hours. But there was something else in his expression: determination. The same steel that had built Harris Construction was now focused on protecting his family from the predator he'd unknowingly invited into their lives. That afternoon, I implemented the first phase of our counterattack. I called Jonathan Pierce at Millennium Wealth Management and scheduled an appointment for the following Tuesday. "Mr. Pierce, my daughter-in-law Laura spoke very highly of your services. I'm interested in discussing some estate planning and investment strategies." "Of course, Mr. Harris. Mrs. Harris mentioned you might be calling. I'd be happy to meet with you and discuss how we can help optimize your financial legacy." The ease with which he agreed to meet, the familiarity with which he mentioned Laura, confirmed my suspicions. This wasn't a random referral. It was part of a coordinated plan to separate me from my assets. Next, I called my real financial advisor, Robert Chen, who had been managing my investments for 15 years. "Robert, I need you to help me set a trap for someone who's trying to defraud me. Are you willing to play along with some creative accounting?" "Mr. Harris, if someone's targeting you financially, I'm absolutely willing to help. What do you need?" I explained the situation and what I needed him to do. By Thursday, Robert would have prepared fake financial documents showing that I was worth significantly more than my actual assets. Documents that would make me irresistible to someone planning to kill for money. But the most critical part of the plan involved something only Dorothy and I knew about: a safety deposit box at First National Bank that contained original documents for every major financial transaction I'd made over the past 40 years. If something happened to me, those documents would prove that any recent changes to my estate were made under duress or deception. That evening, I had a frank conversation with Dorothy. "Sweetheart, I need to tell you something about Laura that's going to be very difficult to hear." Dorothy was folding laundry in our bedroom, the same peaceful domestic routine we'd shared for decades. But her hand stilled when she heard the seriousness in my voice. "William, you're scaring me. Laura is not who she claims to be. She's a criminal who has targeted our family for financial fraud." The color drained from Dorothy's face. "That's impossible. I spent hours with her just yesterday. She's sweet. She's genuine. She's an expert at deception, Dorothy. Everything about her background is fabricated. I showed her the same evidence I'd shared with Michael, watching as my wife's world shifted beneath her feet. The woman she'd begun to think of as a daughter was actually a predator who had been studying our family like prey. But the children," Dorothy whispered, "Emma and James, they adore her, which is why we have to be very careful about how we handle this. We're going to expose her, but we're going to do it in a way that protects everyone we love." Dorothy sat on our bed holding Laura's fake background information, tears streaming down her face. Not for the loss of a daughter-in-law she'd hoped to love, but for the realization that evil could wear such a beautiful, convincing mask. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Over the next hour, I explained Dorothy's role in our plan. It would require her to continue acting normally around Laura while secretly documenting everything she observed. It would mean playing the loving grandmother while knowing that the woman caring for our grandchildren was capable of murder. But Dorothy Harris had spent 45 years as the wife of a man who built his success by outworking and outthinking his competition. She understood that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to fight for it with everything you have. "When do we start?" she asked. "We already have. By next weekend, Laura will either be in police custody or running for her life." That night, I lay awake thinking about the complexity of the trap we were setting. Linda Sue Parker thought she was hunting an elderly couple whose wealth and trust made them easy targets. What she didn't realize was that she'd chosen to prey on people who had spent their entire lives building something worth protecting. And when people like that are threatened, they don't just defend themselves, they go to war. Tuesday morning found me sitting in Jonathan Pierce's office, surrounded by the trappings of expensive financial services, mahogany furniture, crystal decanters, and framed photographs of Pierce with various Chicago politicians and business leaders. Pierce himself was exactly what I'd expected. 50s, well-groomed, with the kind of smile that promised prosperity while concealing predatory intentions. He reviewed the fake financial documents Robert Chen had prepared, his eyes widening slightly at the inflated asset valuations. "Mr. Harris, based on these figures, you're in an excellent position for comprehensive estate optimization. With proper structuring, we could potentially save your beneficiaries millions in tax liability." "That sounds very promising. Laura mentioned you specialize in helping families like ours." "Indeed. Mrs. Harris is a very astute woman. She understands the importance of proactive planning." Pierce leaned forward conspiratorially. "Between you and me, many men your age wait too long to address these matters. You're being very wise to act now while you're still in good health." The implication was clear. Act now while you're still alive, because that might not be the case much longer. "What kind of timeline are we looking at for implementing these changes?" "With your permission, I could have preliminary documents prepared by Friday. The beauty of our streamlined process is that we can expedite everything to ensure your family's security. Expedite everything, rush the paperwork so there would be less time for scrutiny or second thoughts. Classic high-pressure tactics designed to separate marks from their money before they could think clearly." "That sounds perfect. Laura will be so pleased that I'm finally taking care of these details." Pierce's smile widened. "She'll be delighted. Mrs. Harris has expressed such concern about your family's financial future. It's clear how much she cares about everyone's welfare." After leaving Pierce's office, I drove to Roberto Martinez's private investigation firm for the final pieces of our trap. Roberto had been working around the clock to build an airtight case against Linda Sue Parker. "Mr. Harris, I have everything. We need to put her away forever, but we need to catch her in the act of attempting fraud or worse. The evidence we have now proves her pattern of behavior, but prosecutors will want documentation of criminal intent regarding your specific family." "What kind of documentation?" "Recorded conversations where she discusses plans to harm you or manipulate your assets. Evidence of her attempting to tamper with medications or forge documents. Something that shows clear criminal intent, not just suspicious behavior." Roberto handed me a small device that looked like an ordinary pen. "This is a digital recorder with 48 hours of storage capacity. If you can get Laura talking about her plans, even indirectly, it could provide the evidence we need." That afternoon, Michael called with disturbing news. "Dad, Laura's been asking a lot of questions about your routine lately. When you take your medications, when you're usually alone in the house, whether you ever have chest pains or dizzy spells, she's definitely planning something. How are you holding up, son?" "It's horrible, Dad. Sitting across from her at breakfast, watching her help Emma with her homework, knowing what she really is. I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything's normal. Just a few more days. We're almost ready to spring." "The trap." Wednesday evening, Laura called Dorothy directly. "Dorothy, I hope I'm not imposing, but I was wondering if you'd like to have lunch again tomorrow. There's something I'd like to discuss with you, something about William that's been on my mind." Dorothy looked at me across our kitchen table, her face pale but determined. "Of course, dear. What time works for you?" "How about noon at that little cafe in Lincoln Park again? It's so quiet there. Perfect for private conversations." After Dorothy hung up, we both understood that whatever Laura was planning was moving into its final phase. She was positioning herself for another intimate conversation with Dorothy, probably to plant more seeds about my failing health or to gather additional information about our routines. But this time, Dorothy would be prepared. Thursday at noon, Dorothy sat across from Laura at Café Luna, wearing a wire provided by Roberto's team. Through a sophisticated surveillance system, I could hear every word of their conversation from a van parked 3 blocks away. "Dorothy, I'm so glad you could meet me again. You've become like a mother to me, and I really value your wisdom." "That's very sweet of you to say, Laura. I wanted to talk to you about William. I've been concerned about him lately. He seems to be slowing down, and at his age that can be a warning sign of serious health issues." "What do you mean?" "Well, yesterday when I was helping clear the dishes, I noticed he seemed a little unsteady on his feet. And his color, I don't know. He just looks like someone who might be having circulation problems." Laura was building the narrative that would explain my upcoming death, painting a picture of declining health that would make cardiac failure seem inevitable rather than suspicious. "William's always been very healthy for his age," Dorothy said, carefully. "Of course, but Dorothy, you're with him every day. Sometimes we don't notice gradual changes because we see someone constantly. As an outsider, I can see things that might not be obvious to you." "What kind of things?" "Memory lapses, confusion about simple tasks, physical fatigue that seems excessive for normal activity. These can all be early warning signs of serious cardiac issues in men his age." "Do you really think I should be worried?" "I think you should be prepared. Have you and William discussed what would happen if his health took a sudden turn? Do you know how to manage all the financial accounts, the business interests, the investment portfolios?" There it was, the real purpose of this lunch. Laura was preparing Dorothy for widowhood, ensuring that my wife would be completely dependent on others for financial guidance after my death. We've talked about it some, but William handles most of those details himself. Dorothy, that's exactly what worries me. If something happened to William suddenly, you'd be completely overwhelmed. You need to insist that he teach you about the finances now, while he's still mentally sharp enough to explain everything clearly. I suppose you're right. I am right. And Dorothy, I want you to know that if anything does happen, Michael and I will take care of everything. You'll never have to worry about business decisions or investment management. We'll handle all of that so you can focus on your health and happiness. Laura was positioning herself as Dorothy's financial guardian, the trusted family member who would help manage the widow's assets. In reality, she was planning to liquidate everything and disappear, leaving Dorothy penniless and alone. That's very thoughtful of you, dear. It's what family does. And Dorothy, I think it might be wise for William to see a cardiologist soon. Just for a routine checkup, you understand. At his age, prevention is so important. Do you know someone you'd recommend? Actually, I do. Dr. Samuel Harrison at Northwestern Memorial. He's supposed to be excellent with elderly patients. I could even help you make the appointment if you'd like. Dr. Samuel Harrison. Roberto would run that name through his databases, but I was willing to bet we'd find connections to Jonathan Pierce and possibly to some of Linda Sue Parker's previous victims. The lunch continued for another hour, with Laura gradually escalating her concerns about my health while positioning herself as the solution to all of Dorothy's potential problems. By the time they parted ways, she had successfully planted the seeds that would bloom into Dorothy's complete dependence after my planned death. But Linda Sue Parker had no idea that every word she'd spoken was being recorded, building the case that would put her away forever. That evening, Roberto called with the final piece of the puzzle. Mr. Harris, Dr. Samuel Harrison is indeed connected to our investigation. He's been involved in at least 3 cases where elderly patients died shortly after beginning treatment with him. Nothing proven, but enough red flags to suggest he's part of Laura's network. A doctor who can provide medical cover for murder. Exactly. Patients see Dr. Harrison for routine care, and somehow their conditions rapidly deteriorate to the point of fatal cardiac events. If someone were slipping heart medication into those patients' daily routines, Harrison would be positioned to attribute any symptoms to natural disease progression. Every piece of Laura's plan was falling into place. The financial advisor to liquidate assets, the doctor to provide medical cover for murder, and the grieving widow who would need help managing her deceased husband's estate. But tomorrow, Linda Sue Parker would discover that the elderly victims she'd chosen were not the helpless targets she'd expected. Tomorrow, the trap would close. Friday morning arrived grey and cold, with the kind of October chill that penetrates to your bones and reminds you that winter is coming. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the maple trees in our backyard shed their leaves, and felt the weight of what we were about to do. Today, Linda Sue Parker would reveal herself completely, and my family would finally see the predator who had been living among us for 8 months. At 9 a.m., my phone rang with the call I'd been expecting. William, it's Laura. I hope I'm not calling too early, but I wanted to check on you. Dorothy mentioned yesterday that you haven't been feeling well lately. The concern in her voice was so perfectly calibrated that if I didn't know what I knew, I would have been touched by her thoughtfulness. I'm fine, Laura, just the usual aches and pains that come with being 69. That's exactly what worries me. Sometimes what we dismiss as normal aging can actually be warning signs of something more serious. Dorothy told me you've been having some fatigue and occasional dizziness. I hadn't mentioned any such symptoms to Dorothy, which meant Laura was fabricating health concerns to justify whatever she was planning. Well, I suppose I have been more tired than usual lately. William, I really think you should see a doctor. I know it's probably the last thing you want to do, but at your age, prevention is so important. I actually have a recommendation. Dr. Harrison at Northwestern Memorial. He's supposed to be excellent with men your age. I appreciate the concern, Laura, but I really don't think it's necessary. Please, just consider it. For Dorothy's sake, if not your own. She's so worried about you, and I hate seeing her stressed like this. The manipulation was masterful, using my love for Dorothy to pressure me into seeing a doctor who was likely part of her murder conspiracy. Let me think about it. Of course. But William, don't wait too long. Promise me you'll at least consider making an appointment this week. After hanging up, I immediately called Roberto. She's pushing for me to see Dr. Harrison. I think she's ready to move to the next phase. Perfect. We'll have surveillance on Harrison's office and recording equipment ready if you decide to keep that appointment. But Mr. Harris, this is getting dangerous. If you go to see Harrison, you'll be walking into a trap. That's exactly what we want. We need her to commit to action so we can catch her in the act. That afternoon, Michael called with more disturbing intelligence. Dad, Laura's been asking me questions about your daily routine. She wants to know exactly when you take your medications, when you're usually alone in the house, even when you typically go to bed at night. She says she's worried about your safety, but she's planning when to strike. It feels like that, yes. And Dad, she's been researching heart attack symptoms online. I saw the browser history on our computer, dozens of searches about cardiac events in elderly men, signs of heart failure, how to recognize the difference between heart attack and cardiac arrest. Linda Sue Parker was doing her homework, making sure she understood exactly how to make my death look natural and inevitable. Michael, I need you to do something that's going to be very difficult. Tonight, I want you to tell Laura that I've agreed to see Dr. Harrison on Monday morning. Tell her Dorothy convinced me to make the appointment. Dad, what if she tries something this weekend? What if she can't wait until Monday? She won't. She's too careful, too methodical. She'll want the medical appointment in place first to provide cover for whatever she's planning. But I need you to stay alert. Watch for any changes in her behavior, any preparations she might be making. That evening, Dorothy and I had dinner alone for the first time in weeks. The silence in our house felt different, not peaceful but watchful, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. William, are you sure about this plan? What if something goes wrong? What if we've miscalculated somehow? I reached across our kitchen table and took her hand. After 45 years of marriage, her fingers still fit perfectly in mine. Dorothy, I've been thinking about all the men Linda Sue Parker has killed, all those widows left alone and devastated, never knowing that their husbands' deaths weren't natural. Someone has to stop her, and we might be the only people in position to do it. But why does it have to be us? Why can't we just go to the police with what we know? Because what we know isn't enough to convict her. She's too careful, too smart. The only way to stop her is to catch her in the act of trying to commit murder. Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of what I was asking her to do. To watch the man she'd loved for 45 years walk into mortal danger in order to save other families from experiencing what we might suffer. I trust you, she said finally. But William, if something happens to you, if this plan goes wrong somehow, I want you to know that these 45 years have been the greatest gift of my life. Saturday passed with excruciating normalcy. Laura called twice to check on my health, each conversation a masterpiece of feigned concern. She mentioned that Dr. Harrison had an opening on Monday morning if I was interested, and expressed relief. When I told her I'd decided to make the appointment, "You're doing the right thing, William. Dorothy will be so relieved to know you're taking care of yourself." Sunday brought the most chilling development yet. Michael called in the evening, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Dad, Laura spent the afternoon researching digitalis poisoning. She was reading medical journals about therapeutic doses versus toxic levels, symptoms of overdose, how it affects elderly patients with existing heart conditions. Digitalis, the heart medication that in small doses helped regulate cardiac rhythm, but in larger doses could cause fatal arrhythmia that would look exactly like natural heart failure in a man my age. She's planning to use my own medication to kill me. It looks that way. And Dad, she asked me where you keep your pills. She said she wanted to make sure you had enough for the week and offered to pick up refills if needed. Linda Sue Parker was positioning herself to have access to my medications, probably planning to replace my normal dosage with lethal concentrations that would kill me within hours of taking them. Michael, here's what I need you to do. Tomorrow morning, tell Laura that I took my medications early because I was worried about my appointment with Dr. Harrison. Tell her I seem more anxious than usual about the whole thing. Why? Because I want her to think I'm already showing signs of cardiac stress. It'll make her more confident about her plan and more likely to make mistakes. Monday morning, October 28th, dawned clear and cold. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the same navy blue I'd worn to Michael's wedding, and had breakfast with Dorothy, as if it were just another ordinary day. But both of us knew that by evening, either Linda Sue Parker would be in police custody, or William Harris would be dead. At 9:30, I drove to Northwestern Memorial Hospital for my appointment with Dr. Samuel Harrison, knowing that I was walking into a trap, but confident that the trap would close on the wrong person. Roberto's surveillance team was already in position, recording equipment was active, and somewhere in the city, Linda Sue Parker was preparing to commit the murder that would finally expose her for what she truly was. The end game had begun. Dr. Samuel Harrison's office was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture, impressive diplomas, and the kind of clinical atmosphere that suggested serious medical expertise. Harrison himself was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being trusted with life and death decisions. Mr. Harris, I understand Mrs. Harris referred you for a cardiac consultation. She's expressed some concern about symptoms you've been experiencing lately. The fact that he immediately mentioned Laura confirmed my suspicions. This appointment had been coordinated in advance, probably with specific instructions about what symptoms to find and how to treat them. I've been having some fatigue and occasional dizziness, I said, following the script we'd prepared. My daughter-in-law thought I should have someone take a look. Harrison nodded knowingly as he reviewed my fabricated medical history. At your age, these symptoms can definitely be concerning. Let's run some tests and see what we're dealing with. For the next hour, I submitted to a comprehensive examination while Roberto's team monitored everything from their surveillance post. Harrison was thorough, professional, and completely convincing as he discovered irregularities in my heart. Rhythm that suggested immediate treatment was necessary. Mr. Harris, I'm concerned about what I'm seeing. You have signs of atrial fibrillation that could lead to serious complications if left untreated. I'm going to prescribe a medication regimen that should help stabilize your condition. He handed me a prescription for Digitalis, a higher dosage than anyone my age should have been taking, enough to cause fatal complications if taken as directed. This medication is very effective, but it's important to take it exactly as prescribed. Too little won't help your condition, but too much can be dangerous. I want you to start immediately and come back in 2 weeks for follow-up. Doctor, is this something I should be worried about? Let's put it this way. You're fortunate we caught this when we did. If you'd waited much longer, we might have been dealing with a medical emergency. Harrison was building the narrative that would explain my death, a man with undiagnosed heart problems whose condition deteriorated rapidly despite treatment. If I died from digitalis poisoning, it would look like tragic medication complications rather than murder. I left Northwestern Memorial with a prescription for my own execution and drove home knowing that Linda Sue Parker's plan was now fully in motion. That afternoon, Laura called Dorothy with urgent concern. "Dorothy, I just spoke with Dr. Harrison's office. He said William's condition is more serious than expected and that he needs to start medication immediately. I offered to pick up the prescription for you. I know how stressful this must be." "That's very thoughtful of you, dear. I'll bring it over this evening." And Dorothy, Dr. Harrison emphasized how important it is for William to take the medication, exactly as prescribed. I thought I could help organize his pills for the week to make sure he doesn't miss any doses. Linda Sue Parker was volunteering to handle the medications that would kill me, ensuring she could control the dosage and timing of my death. At 6 p.m., Laura arrived at our house carrying the prescription bottle and a weekly pill organizer. She sat at our kitchen table with Dorothy, carefully counting out pills for each day of the week. "The doctor said William should take these with his morning coffee," Laura explained, her voice full of helpful concern. "It's important to be consistent about the timing, but I was watching from the hallway, recording everything with Roberto's device, as Laura palmed several extra pills and slipped them into Monday morning's compartment. Instead of the prescribed single dose, she was giving me enough digitalis to kill a horse. There, she said, closing the pill organizer with satisfaction. That should take care of everything for the week." Laura left our house that evening believing she had just armed the weapon that would kill me within 24 hours. She'd positioned herself as the helpful daughter-in-law who was simply following doctor's orders, ensuring that my death would look like unfortunate medical complications rather than murder. But Linda Sue Parker had no idea that William Harris had been one step ahead of her from the very beginning. Tuesday morning, I followed my normal routine exactly as Laura expected. I made coffee, took my morning medications from the pill organizer she'd prepared, and settled into my recliner to read the newspaper. Except the pills I took weren't the ones Laura had left for me. Roberto's team had replaced them with harmless placebos, while sophisticated recording equipment documented every moment of my supposed final morning. At 9:15, my phone rang. Laura's voice carried barely concealed excitement. "William, how are you feeling this morning? Any changes since you started the new medication?" "Actually, I do feel a bit strange, kind of dizzy and short of breath." "Oh, my goodness, that sounds serious. You should probably lie down. Sometimes heart medications can cause temporary side effects while your body adjusts." She was monitoring my condition, waiting for the digitalis poisoning to take effect, ready to call for emergency medical assistance once I was beyond saving. "Maybe you're right. I think I'll rest for a while." "Good idea. I'll check on you later. And William, if you start feeling worse, call me immediately. Don't try to tough it out." Linda Sue Parker was positioning herself as the concerned family member who would discover my body and call for help, ensuring she'd be present to control the narrative when emergency responders arrived. At 10:30, I called her back, with growing urgency in my voice. "Laura, I think something's wrong. I'm having chest pains and trouble breathing. Should I call 911? "Oh no, yes, call immediately. I'm coming over right now." Laura arrived at our house within 10 minutes, her face a perfect mask of concern and fear. She found me lying on the living room couch, apparently struggling for breath, while Dorothy hovered nearby in obvious distress. "William, stay with me," Laura said, kneeling beside the couch. "The ambulance is on its way." But instead of medical help, what arrived was Roberto Martinez with a team of federal agents. "Linda Sue Parker, you're under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." The transformation on Laura's face was instant and terrifying. The mask of concern disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating that revealed her true nature for the first time. I don't know what you're talking about. This man is having a heart attack. He needs medical attention. Mr. Harris is perfectly fine, Agent Sarah Chen said, showing her FBI credentials. We've been monitoring your activities for weeks, and we have recorded evidence of your planning his murder. Laura's eyes darted around the room, looking for escape routes or explanations that might save her, but there was nowhere to run and nothing left to lie about. You replaced Mr. Harris's prescribed medication with lethal doses of digitalis, Agent Chen continued. We have video documentation of you tampering with his pills, recorded conversations where you discussed his planned death, and evidence linking you to similar murders in Texas, Florida, and 3 other states. As the agents read Laura her rights, Michael arrived with Emma and James. He'd been waiting at Roberto's office, ready to bring the children home once their mother was safely in custody. Daddy, why are there police cars? Emma asked, her small hand gripping Michael's tightly. Mommy had to go away for a while, sweetheart, but everything's going to be okay. Laura was led to the police car in handcuffs, her designer dress and perfect makeup a stark contrast to the reality of what she'd become. As the car pulled away from our house, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or triumph, but profound sadness for the waste of a life that had chosen destruction over creation. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of Linda Sue Parker's crimes became clear. 5 confirmed murders across 7 states, nearly $8 million stolen from elderly victims, and a network of conspirators including Dr. Harrison and Jonathan Pierce, all of whom were arrested and charged. Michael filed for divorce immediately and began the difficult process of helping Emma and James understand why the woman they'd called Mommy would never be coming home. Dorothy and I took custody of the children while Michael worked through his own trauma and guilt. But here's the part of this story that even I didn't see coming, the moment that changed everything about how I understood justice and mercy. 3 months after Laura's arrest, I received a letter from her in prison. It was written in elegant handwriting on cheap paper, and it said simply, Mr. Harris, I know you'll never forgive me for what I plan to do to your family, but I want you to know that seeing the love between you and Dorothy, watching Michael's devotion to his children, being part of a real family even briefly, it was the first time in my life I understood what I'd been destroying. I don't expect mercy, but I wanted you to know that your family taught me something about the life I could have chosen instead. Thank you for showing me what love actually looks like. I sat in my study for hours after reading that letter, thinking about Linda Sue Parker's childhood, about the choices that had led her to become a predator, about the possibility that even the most damaged souls might carry a spark of something redeemable. And then I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I visited her in prison, drove to the Federal Correctional Facility in Pekin, Illinois on a cold February morning, signed in as a visitor, and sat across from the woman who had planned to murder my entire family. Why did you come? She asked, her voice smaller and more fragile than I'd ever heard it. Because my wife taught me something about the difference between justice and vengeance. Justice means you pay for what you've done. Vengeance means I hate you for it, and I choose not to carry that hate. For 2 hours, we talked about her childhood, about the foster homes and abuse that had shaped her into someone who saw other people as resources to be exploited rather than human beings to be loved. I listened to her describe the emptiness that had driven her to seek worth through manipulation and wealth rather than connection and purpose. When I stood to leave, Linda Sue Parker looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. Mr. Harris, I know I don't deserve this, but thank you for treating me like a human being. No one has done that in longer than I can remember. I left that prison knowing that Linda Sue Parker would spend the rest of her life behind bars, paying for the choices she'd made. But I also left knowing that William Harris would spend the rest of his life free from the burden of hating her. 6 months later, Dorothy and I legally adopted Emma and James. Michael moved back into our neighborhood, and slowly, carefully, we rebuilt our family on a foundation of truth instead of lies. Today, Emma is 7 and wants to be an engineer like her grandfather. James is 5 and insists on helping me with every home repair project. Dorothy spends her days teaching them how to bake cookies and tend the garden she's been nurturing for 37 years. And sometimes, when I'm tucking the children into a bed or watching Dorothy read them stories, I think about the choice Linda Sue Parker made to seek worth through destruction rather than creation. I think about the families she destroyed, the lives she ended, the trust she betrayed. And then I think about the choice Dorothy and I made to respond to her darkness with light, to answer her hatred with love, to transform what could have been our destruction into our family's resurrection. Because that's what I learned from this whole experience, that revenge might feel satisfying, but redemption feels eternal. Linda Sue Parker took everything she could steal, destroyed everything she could manipulate, and killed everyone she could deceive. But in the end, the thing that defeated her wasn't my anger or my cleverness or my ability to set a trap. What defeated her was the realization that she'd spent her entire life destroying the very thing she'd always been searching for: a family that loved unconditionally, forgave freely, and chose mercy over vengeance. The irony is almost perfect. She came to our house planning to murder us for our money, but what she found instead was something worth more than all the wealth she'd ever stolen: the knowledge of what it feels like to be truly loved. And that knowledge, that glimpse of what her life could have been, was more devastating to Linda Sue Parker than any punishment I could have devised. 3 years later, I still receive letters from her occasionally. She tells me about the GED classes she's taking, about the counseling sessions where she's trying to understand the trauma that shaped her choices, about the other inmates she's begun mentoring who are struggling with their own demons. I don't write back often, but when I do, I tell her about Emma's first piano recital, about James learning to ride a bicycle, about Dorothy's prize-winning roses, about Michael finding love again with a kindergarten teacher named Sarah, who treats our grandchildren like they're her own. I tell her about the life that continues to grow and flourish because we chose forgiveness over fury, mercy over revenge. And sometimes, in her letters back, Linda Sue Parker tells me that knowing our story, knowing that the family she tried to destroy chose to pray for her redemption instead of her punishment, has become the foundation for whatever healing might be possible in her broken life. That, more than any elaborate revenge I could have planned, feels like justice. Not the kind of justice that destroys, but the kind that builds. Not the kind that ends stories, but the kind that begins them. Because at 69 years old, I've learned that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies, it's transforming them into something better than they ever imagined they could be. Dorothy was right, as she's been right about most important things for 45 years. The strongest response to hatred isn't more hatred. It's love so powerful that it reveals the emptiness of everything that came before it. Linda Sue Parker spent her life believing that people were either predators or prey, that families were resources to be exploited, that love was a weakness to be manipulated. What she discovered, sitting in our kitchen eating Dorothy's beef Wellington, was a family, so secure in its love for each other that we could afford to extend that same love to someone who didn't deserve it. And that gift, that unearned, undeserved, unconditional love, was more transformative than any punishment the justice system could devise. Today, Emma and James call me Grandpa Bill and Dorothy Grandma Dot. They have no memory of the woman who once planned to orphan them, no awareness of how close they came to losing everything they loved. Michael has healed enough to love again, to trust again, to believe that not everyone who claims to care about him is plotting his destruction. Dorothy tends her garden and spoils her grandchildren and has never once expressed regret about the mercy we chose to show the woman who tried to destroy us. And I spend my days grateful for the reminder that even at 69, there are still lessons to be learned about the difference between justice and vengeance, between defeating enemies and redeeming them. Linda Sue Parker wanted our money, our assets, our lives. What she got instead was something infinitely more valuable: the knowledge of what it means to be forgiven by people who had every right to hate her, and in the end, that forgiveness didn't just free her from the darkness she'd been carrying. It freed us from carrying it too. And you? Would you have made the same choice I did? Would you have visited someone in prison who had planned to murder your entire family? Would you have chosen mercy over revenge? I want to know your opinion in the comments below, because sometimes the most important conversations aren't about what we do to people who hurt us. They're about what we choose to become because of how they treated us. If you found meaning in this story, please subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might need to hear that love is always stronger than hate, that forgiveness is always more powerful than revenge, and that the greatest victories come not from destroying our enemies, but from showing them a better way to be human. Click on the video recommendation that appears on your screen to hear another story as moving as this one about the choice between the person we are and the person we choose to become. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, respect isn't just a boundary we defend. Sometimes it's a gift we give to people who haven't earned it yet, because that's the only way they'll ever learn what it means to be worthy of it.